I'm still quite shocked actually about what happened over the weekend. I feel like I'm still in a trance-like, dream-like sequence. So over the weekend, I was privileged enough to be accepted at the MIT Hacking Racism. And over the weekend, our team, together with Alejandra, Fion, Abbas, and Vivian, won. So our team, aptly named Empower, which talks about data bias, specifically in clinical research and in clinical trials, won. And it feels like, it feels sorry, it feels like it feels so good, and I'm so elated about what happened. Hello everyone, this is Dr. Lowell Sala once again of NYC Emerging Healthcare Technology, your go-to place if you want to learn more about blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence, data science, and web development in healthcare, and also if you want to learn more about digital health. So today, what we're going to talk about that event, that activity that happened over the weekend, specifically talking about hackathons, virtual hackathons, and practically what are the opportunities out there for entrepreneurs, how to bring your idea, how to pitch your idea, all these things. And at the same time, we are going to, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you now to this journey, to my journey in the world of technology, health and technology, specifically the tech startups. Now, if you haven't subscribed, please make sure to click that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so that you will be able to hear and see every time I upload new videos and new content. Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face, tell me that you love me. Even if today's session is actually brought to you by Wandering Bar. It's a soy-based wax that is hand-poured here in New York City. This is the citron and mandarin scent, which really smells so good. And I also have, I think this is the linen scent. So anyway, before I do that, I just want to introduce myself so that you also have an idea who I am and where I'm coming from. So hello, I'm Dr. Lowell Sala. In terms of experience, I have 10 years experience in clinical and family medicine, and occupational medicine. So I have a diploma in occupational medicine. I have 2 years in in the pharmaceutical industry. I work as a medical science liaison for AstraZeneca and Bundi Pharma, and 4 years in software development. And also in terms of hackathon, if I can put your eyes now in the screen, in terms of hackathons, I won recently the 2020 MIT Hacking Racism. Also won in 2018 at the New York City MIT Grand Hackathon, Hacking Medicine. And also I'm an organizer of the NYC Emerging Healthcare Technology Meetup. So I'm going to put the link down below if you want to join my group. So anyway, the first thing that you're probably wondering is what is a hackathon and how do we define a hackathon? Because obviously this is our topic, right? So hackathons or hacking in general is originally defined as breaching of computer security or penetrating a very complex system or a very complex system like a computer system. But we want to go beyond. We want to extend our definition to more than just breaching computer or security systems. We want to be more inclusive, which is why we define hackathons now as an inclusive and collaborative space to bring people with different backgrounds to come up with a product or a minimum viable product, an MVP, within 24 to 48 hours. So it's if you look at it in that context, it's really a sprint. But then if you want to look at it in the context of having a startup, it's a marathon. It's a long drawn out process that eventually you will learn a lot, not just about yourself, but also how you interact with other people. And you also learn a lot about your teammates in that aspect. So what are the things that I think are important whenever you're trying to join a hackathon? The first thing that I want to talk about or discuss is having a learning mindset. So having a mindset that's totally for learning. I want you to open up whenever you're joining or you're planning to attend a hackathon, I want you to open up yourself to all these different perspectives, because ultimately these hackathons will really be your way of understanding. Everyone in that hackathon was selected by the organizers, for example, for a specific reason, and with that reason you can hopefully create better solutions based on the different perspectives of the people in your team. So whenever you are in that aspect, in that mindset, it's important to listen to what other people are saying. Don't just talk and talk. This is what I usually see whenever whenever I join some of my group mates, for example. Just talk and talk. Just try to listen. Try to listen to what the problem is and what the other person is actually telling you, so that you can advance, you can be more successful in that aspect. Another thing that I wanna delve on is to have an objective. So why do you want to join this hackathon? What are your objectives? Do you want to learn? Do you have a startup 6 months from now? Do you want to have a solution? Do you want to solve problems in not just in healthcare but in society, like what happened when we did the hacking racism? What do you want to solve? So have an objective early on, so that you'll be clear on what to do next whenever all these things are, all these problems are happening, especially when you try to delve in now, you go through the process of having a hackathon. So another thing is to learn the judging criteria. What are the, for example, innovation impact? How much percentage are those, are those gonna be counted for in terms of the hackathon? And I'm gonna put you now to this, to the hackathon that I joined over the weekend. So over the weekend, as I already mentioned, I joined the MIT Hacking Racism in Healthcare, and there were 7 tracks actually. You can apply on all those different tracks. For example, you'll be given an option to apply to those different tracks. And I just want to talk about all these different tracks, especially for hacking racism, because I think it's very important to be able to identify, know where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, where there are opportunities, and where there are, threats, for example. But like doing a SWOT analysis, but more than, of course, realizing your strengths, your weaknesses, it's also important what your objective is, or what the hackathon really is all about. So the track A, it was actually very nice, because it was all about public health. So at the public health level, racism is one of the major barriers to eradicating racial inequities in health outcomes. So what the organizers wanted us to do is, how can you develop interventions that dismantle the mechanisms of racism and replace such mechanisms with equitable structures, policies, practices, norms, and values so that a healthy society can be realized without racist and discriminatory processes and practices, for example. So another track was on population and wellness. And one of the major problems that they wanted to address at the time was lack of access to quality healthcare are also disproportionately burdening communities of color. So how can you deliver better primary care and disease management for communities of color? For track C, it talks about individual health and wellness. So in the US, for example, morbidity rates of chronic diseases are higher for people of color than their white counterparts. So how do we dismantle healthcare diseases disparities for chronic disease sufferers? For example, chronic disease like diabetes, people with cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and what innovative solutions can you provide in reducing Black maternal mortality rates and responses to pain and complaints? And the fourth one, which is actually the track where we won, and the track where I was in, was talking about data bias in clinical research and trials. And this is particularly interesting because I never realized, for example, that the EGFR, the estimated glomerular filtration rate, is actually quite weird, because for Blacks, for example, you need to multiply it by 1.2. And I was wondering, why do you need to? I think the reasoning behind the EGFR issue was that Blacks are more, I think they have more muscle mass. That's what they mentioned. But the thing is, some Asians do have higher muscle mass, right? So I think that there's some computations in medicine, for example, that are innately biased and have problems. They have big problems, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to tackle about data bias in clinical research and trials. So data-driven decisions in making and artificial intelligence platforms have started to become prevalent in the healthcare industry to cut costs and deliver better healthcare services. So with this challenge, for example, this track, what we wanted to do is, how can we ensure that the researchers focusing on patient-oriented studies include cohorts that are representative of racial demographics? So how do we reduce variations and approaches to treatment based on stereotype differences along the lines of race, color, ethnicity, or inaccurate beliefs? How do we ensure that the healthcare research and clinical trials are reflective of the population? And how can we build equity into machine learning, analytics, and algorithms in AI? So I was fascinated, and this is where I joined, and I got accepted specifically for this, and we won with this track, together with, of course, my group mates. And then the other tracks were mostly educational and financial health. So, what are racial and ethnic minorities comprise of a very small population of health providers in the U.S. and they're not poorly represented. So, how do we improve affordability of educational resources? And the other tracks, which is also equally important, was about social justice and policy. So there are overt and hidden discriminatory procedures and practices that permeate the healthcare institutions, perpetuating racial disparities in health and outcomes. So how do we connect healthcare administrators specifically to underserved minorities for patient-centric policymaking? How can you guarantee social justice in healthcare practices? And this is, I think, very important, especially in the aspect of law and policy, because of all this that's happening right now. And the one of my favorite as well was strategy, which talks about intersectionality. So every one of us, complex individuals, identities and experiences, have identity overlapping identities and experiences, which how we define ourselves. So I was really fascinated with this track. So within racial and ethnic matters, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and age play a huge role in accessing healthcare and determining the health outcomes. So how do you address complex healthcare needs of SUD, LGBTQIA+, and transgender healthcare needs? So how do we create new partnerships to address health needs of disabled and disability advocacy? How do we eliminate racial inequalities related to treatment plan at diagnosing or aging adults? And are there ways wherein we can create or leverage technology and data to support their ability to remain independent? So this is the seven tracks that that was in hacking racism, and I was glad, I was actually proud to be a part of that, that hacking racism. Okay, so the next part that I want to delve on and emphasize on is to come up with a problem in mind and not to be afraid to pitch your idea. I remember the first time I joined the MIT brand, the MIT hackathons in general was in 2018. And at the time I wanted to create a solution to help people with opioid problem, how to create a tracking system based on blockchain. I wanted to create this. I remember I felt so afraid at the time because I didn't know how to talk, especially it was one of the first times here in New York City, and I didn't know how the audience would react. But I just had the courage to have an idea, because it was like 1 minute. You were only allowed to pitch for 1 minute and then ask, what type of members do you want the people to join you. So it was a great experience, and I urge you to actually go there to do that, because it's also very, it's liberating if you think about it at the end. So another thing that I want to talk about after coming with the problem in mind is to generate and filter your ideas and learn constructive criticism, because at the end of the day you're in the hackathon, for example, to learn with each other, to learn each other's experiences and to learn from each other's experiences and from each other's specialties. And it will have a bearing later on to come up with a solution, because you have to be able to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses, and at the same time what can they contribute to help it, to make the solution a lot better. So that's also the thing that you have to consider. Emphasize on constructive criticism. So every criticism that you will get has an impact on how you create or how you craft eventually your problems and your solutions. Another thing that I want to talk about in terms of tips and tricks for hackathons is to attract a diverse talent, and specifically that of a diverse skill set. So whenever I join the team, for example, should have one as a researcher, one is doing, for example, at the time business, or an entrepreneur to talk about the business aspect. And of course, you usually have researchers, you have a developer, and you have a product manager to talk about what the product is, and have a good marketing plan in terms of coming up with future plans. For example, marketing plan in facilitating your minimum viable product. And another thing that I want to talk about is to not be afraid to pivot. So for example, at the time we were talking about EGFR, right? EGFR. But after EGFR means estimated glomerular filtration, the MIT hacking racism. But eventually we pivoted, we went into something, the problems, because while discussing about the problem, we pivoted. We came up with another problem which we think was a lot better, and based on that pivot, we won based on that pivot. So another thing that I want to talk about, especially if it's a face-to-face hackathon, for example, or not on-site, sorry, the on-site hackathon, it is so hard to be spending the entire 24 to 48 hours in that same desk. So it's important to take short breaks every now and then. But for virtual hackathons, well, you can actually just take your break anytime. So that's the advantage of having a virtual hackathon as opposed to an on-site hackathon. But always have a time to have breaks so that you won't be so jaded, and then at the end of the day you will come up with a much better solution if you take breaks every now and then. So invest your time also for presentation. Some hackathons, for example, may have only 3 minutes presentation, so make sure you're able to identify all those three: the problem, the solution, and what are your plans. So 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, you can do that. And you can also, some hackathons, for example, will give you 5 minutes, like the blockchain based application, for example. And some hackathons may be more on developers, so they want you to come up with a product, coding, for example. They want you to code and come up with a viable product at the end of the session. Some hackathons, like the MTA, for example, are more particular about ideas. What can you share? What is something new that you want to share, that you can give, that you can, you can make the problem, that can solve this problem? What innovative idea that you can share? And you don't even have to invent the wheel. You can just use existing platforms or existing relationships, which is also very important, especially when you try to solve a problem as complex as healthcare. So another thing is, and ultimately, it's important to really connect with your teammates, to connect with your mentors, and specifically your sponsors, because I think, hackathons, at the end of the day, whether you may win or you may not win, ultimately it is the level of relationship that you establish within that community, and in a sense you'll be creating your own community. You'll be a part of that community, and with that partnership you can even get a job. You can have other opportunities of having, for example, a job, because people know you already. People are able to understand your learning style, your learning techniques, and you're able to, or your working habits, for example. So with that, you can also get opportunities that are far more than having opportunities that is not within the hackathon itself. So think of hackathon as also a way to connect to all these different people, to have other opportunities open up to you. I remember a lot of my friends got job offers actually after joining hackathons, because they also were able to share their experience with the hackathons. So I think that's the end. Now, if you haven't subscribed, please make sure to click the subscribe button and tell me more about your experience in join hackathons, and what are the things that you're looking for, and what are the things that that made you realize when you joined your hackathons. So with that, thank you so much for joining. Bye guys.